right, we are live. This is the first of the Multimedia Labs um, end of semester, end of year interviews with our CTAs who've been working hard, not only on their academic work, but for us and doing a lot of research. And today we're talking to Caín, one of our CTAs. How long was it? 2019, you said?
2019.
Yeah, so who's been a CTA with us since 2019. And we're going to talk about a couple of different things that he's been working on, including NFTs, social media research, etc. But do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, hey guys, my name is Cain. I've been a CTA here at the MMLs ever since I was a sophomore back in 2018. And I've seen the spaces change a lot, honestly. The big shift happened during the pandemic year. And I feel like that changed a lot of behavior on campus, which also kind of made the MMLs kind of redefine what their purpose was in the school. So yeah, I guess in terms of creative work, I am a film concentrator here at Brown University. I've worked on a documentary in Brazil on collectivism and corruption. Yeah, so recently I've been more involved in basically the more analytical side of social media and media in general. So that's where I'm currently at, and some of my work reflects that in the past year.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting projects that you did recently was some research on social media, right? TikTok, YouTube, what's best? How do I get all the clicks? How do I get all the likes? And you recently published a article on Medium, right? Was that like your first foray into writing and publishing?
Yeah, so I've actually been thinking about just writing more in general for about the past year, but I don't know, it's kind of different when you don't really have strict deadlines for yourself.
Sure.
So yeah, that was kind of my first foray into writing, and I thought it was really cool. I actually learned a lot. It's basically just making a self project and trying to basically answer the question, have those light bulb moments around the way. I felt like that was very gratifying, having those two separate ideas that you see how somehow work together, and you see the application in real life. So yeah, in terms of the social media use, I really saw over the pandemic that the people who understood the algorithm the best were also those that were able to maximize, I guess, what success was on social media. So yeah, a lot of that got me thinking about, okay, all right, if I post something on Instagram, what would be the best time to post it? If you're a content creator, what is the best frequency at which you post that? And those are a lot of the questions that the article and research is really trying to aim at. And yeah, I mean, few interesting key insights, I guess, in retrospect is these algorithms are constantly changing. So kind of the people who tend to do the best are the ones who also invest the most time into understanding the algorithm. And yeah, I remember one time I was just on Instagram, not Instagram, definitely TikTok, and there's an account that was gonna post the exact same meme thousands of times just to see how the algorithm basically spit it out. And it was interesting because it was the exact same common video that everybody knew, but again, it was a video that was been proven to have a lot of success, and a lot of people responded well to it. And when you would click on the profile of this one page in particular, it would have the exact same video dozens of times, and some of those videos had a couple thousand views. Some had only a handful of views, 5 or 6, and some views had views in the hundreds of thousands. Wow. And this is the exact same video just being spit out throughout the day, and
in the same account.
In the same account, yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so that got me thinking about kind of all right, what is exactly happening on the background? What do we not know about? Because I feel like just logically, I feel like that account shouldn't be having that much coverage at all, right?
Right, totally.
Specifically, with the exact same video, and one that was honestly, quite frankly, just stolen and just reposted. So yeah, that made me think a lot about what's happening on the back end of things. What am I not seeing? How is all this actually being distributed across millions of people across the world?
It's so interesting. Especially talking about TikTok. TikTok seems to be a kind of platform that we haven't seen before, in the sense that these algorithms are creating these senses of spaces, right? They, there's there's talk about like, like help, I'm on right wing TikTok right now, or help, or like, oh, if you want to get into foraging gardener TikTok, follow here, right? So there's this idea that these algorithms are actually in some way creating these digital spaces and narratives, which is really, really interesting. Something I don't think that we see as much on Instagram or Facebook, if you can still call that social media. And I know that your research talked a little bit about how those algorithms worked from like a very local into a regional into national kind of distribution. Wondering if you're thinking there's any connection, or if you have any thoughts on like this idea of like, yeah, this algorithm's taking me to a certain zone or space of of social media.
Yeah, and that's honestly a big question people have been trying to really grasp around. So if you think about like I guess like the 80s and 90s, kind of like the hub of media and spaces were like the magazine and like print, and it eventually changed into kind of like TV with MTV, and things like that. People would go to MTV to basically consume media and enter some of these spaces. And nowadays it's basically switched over to TikTok and Instagram. So like if you're really trying to understand what's like trending right now, like what is going on, like what are all these like I guess like niches that are opening up, like you go to TikTok for that nowadays. And that has honestly a lot of mixed responses because it comes with its own pros and cons really. And yeah, I mean again, like I feel like one of the great things about TikTok, however, is that it does create a lot of niche spaces for a lot of people that typically didn't have communities to fall back on. And it ranges from everything, honestly. Like I know like my girlfriend's sister, she's really into skating, and she's also really into Harry Potter. And I remember she occasionally gets TikToks on Harry Potter skaters.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny.
And that's something that was only imaginable really through TikTok. Because I mean, try getting something like that like in the 1980s on like a large print
Right.
organization.
It's kind of that long tail
Yeah.
sort of experience.
Yeah.
So you said this video experiment kind of got you partly interested in writing the article. Did you start with like a personal interest, like how do I get my work out there? What was that like?
Yeah, so I guess like in terms of personal interest, it wasn't really there. Sincerely, like I'm not a huge fan of social media myself. It's just something that I was just trying to understand. Because I mean, I don't know, like it's just my social media usage. I use it for mainly communication, to keep in touch with friends and family, and that's about it. Like I'm not really producing content. And I also try to just separate kind of like my value and like my self identity from like I guess like how many likes I'm getting and things like that. Some people really get attached to that when they first get on social media, and it could be quite toxic. Yeah, like there was that study that came out by Facebook that said that like a lot of teenage girls and preteen girls just have all these sorts of like identity like and self-image issues because of how they're using social media and the effect that social media is having on them. So yeah, I'm trying to have a healthier relationship with social media, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
It makes total sense.
So basically, you're just trying to suss out the landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like I understand not being into it like as a platform, I totally get that as a consumer. But you do produce media, and the other half of TikTok especially, although of course still true for Instagram and others, is that it is a platform with which to actually produce media. Now, I'm always a little skeptical of those things because I don't think people kind of acknowledge that like, by using that platform to create media, you're being circumscribed by a type of tool, like this is the way that voiceover works on TikTok or that. But I was wondering if you had any time to like experiment with what it's like as a media creation tool, either TikTok or a different platform. And do you see value? Do you see harm? What are the kind of like things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of value that could come from this sort of like usage. One that's not necessarily TikTok or Instagram is Twitter. So I took a gap year work as a venture capitalist, and Twitter is very popular from the tech community. And it's actually, for those that are quite active on it, it's actually a great way to meet new people, make connections, and I guess like expand like your network in ways that you normally wouldn't be able to get. Like oftentimes like you'll be able to find like someone who posts like, oh, I'm having a dinner with like five, I guess like with space for like 5 software engineers, like comment if you're interested, and then people would just like quickly like DM the person and get on a dinner. So stuff like that happens all the time on Twitter. And I guess that's also the expectation of Twitter, and like that's how people are expected to like behave, and that's acceptable. That's acceptable if you go on TikTok, post like a couple 100,000. A lot of people, a lot of those who are kids as well, and say, "Oh, who wants to come over for dinner?" Like, not the same norms exactly.
Sure.
Interesting. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it ends with, I guess, like the end value of what you're expecting. So I guess like for TikTok, someone who would benefit more from that would be someone who's maybe into like more like wide audience type of things, for lack of a better word. So maybe somebody who benefits from having like name recognition, maybe influencers who like have other social medias like Instagram that use TikTok as a way to get as I guess like flow into their other social medias, and traffic. So for someone like that would benefit like huge, and it has like unlimited benefits in that sense, because so many things that come from that, but not everybody's positioned to benefit in the same way. And like me, like I'm gonna have a career in tech most likely, so something like TikTok wouldn't necessarily be the most beneficial. um, People in tech tend to have like keep low profiles, I guess, like in the greater sense of things, but tend to communicate more with people within tech. So I guess it's just like scope as well.
Interesting.
But yeah, overall, key idea is just not everybody is positioned to benefit in the same way. So a lot of it just depends on kind of like the end goal.
It's interesting because you said before, you were saying how niche TikTok was, right? Like from an audience perspective, but you're thinking from a creator's perspective, it's better. You're more of a broadcast medium.
Yeah, so I mean, it could serve multiple ways. Like there's just general humor, like just pranks that everybody tends to enjoy. Those get distributed to everybody,
Right.
And there's TikTokers for that. And there's other TikTokers with, I guess, more unique identities and speak better to certain audiences, and those by nature tend to be niche.
Great.
Fascinating.
So, did you look at other? It sounds like you looked at TikTok. Did you kind of do a comparison? Obviously, you use Twitter personally for professional development. Instagram, was there any other?
Yeah, I looked into Instagram, YouTube Reels, and Facebook Reels as well. So Facebook Reels, when I was doing research, it was only like a month old at the time, so there wasn't much either. YouTube Shorts, also not much information at the time, so there's not much I could do there. It was quite limited. Like all the analysis I could find was just purely speculation. But based on like how people understood the algorithms, just like the main YouTube algorithm, or like the main Instagram or Facebook algorithm, they were able to kind of like, I guess like speculate how it was going to be working with the new ones and how it was going to synergize with the existing content I already had. But other than that, like nothing concrete really.
So just comparison to the kind of traditional YouTube to I see.
Yeah, like for example, like YouTube has a very global way of distributing content.
Right.
Whereas TikTok is like more niche. Like TikTok will send things out first to, I guess, like people in your city, people in your neighborhood, and then once it starts getting tractions, then I'll send it up to like neighboring cities and then neighboring countries, and it reaches global, like I guess, status after a while. But like YouTube tends to be more global from the beginning.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I've noticed that in my little bit of time on TikTok, that the people that on my For You page that aren't popular, like they aren't TikTok stars yet, they're actually from the Rhode Island area. Like I've seen a lot of like, oh, that's Kennedy Plaza in the background. Like so that's been really, really interesting. So Caín, really high level, if I am wanting to become a social media maven, star, what have you, what are like your top 3 tips for getting on the platforms and getting the most out of it?
Yeah. So first is consistency. So you have to be uploading kind of like at a constant pace. So it could be anywhere. It could be anywhere from like TikTok posting like anywhere like between like 2 to 3 times a day, which is a lot.
Yeah.
People have to start giving backlash for TikTok for that, because now there's just a lot of like bad content being out there just for the sake of like getting on the algorithm's good side, right?
Gotcha.
So it could be anywhere between 2 to 3 times a day on TikTok, or it could honestly be less, but at that point you have more dedicated audience, who tends to have higher ratings on whatever you produce. So it varies from site to site. You could find the exact numbers on the article that is linked in the description. But yeah, I mean, just A, post on a consistent basis. Uh, B, post good content. So if you have content that tends to drive up likes, that tends to drive up kind of like the metrics that these sites use, it's gonna level your content up. And one fun one for like TikTok, for example, is how long you actually watch the video and how many times you replay it. So if you guys like, for example, watch a video from start to finish uninterrupted, that's a very good sign. That's a very good way to bump up the ranking on the algorithm, and also like rewatching it. So just like how much you're interacting with just like that one video tends to drive up the metrics.
Oh, I'm helping so many people then, because when there's a funny one, I will just like put my phone down while I'm brushing my teeth and just have it on loop and just keep chuckling every 30 seconds when the punchline hits. So, oh, that's interesting. Thank you, Caín. That's really interesting.
Yeah. The third one, I would say, third piece of advice. Let me think. Yeah, I feel like if you just do those two on a good basis, like you're bound to blow up. Also, just three is time. Sometimes it just takes time, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know, for example, the YouTube algorithm, you have to be dedicated for a year, and then it really makes it like they could just blow up and be on like the main algorithm front page.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also consistency because a lot of people like they'll start it off and just get disappointed when they're not like overnight famous, you know.
Right.
Sure. Makes sense.
So the other topic that you've been looking on is NFTs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you obviously that stands for what? Non-fungible tokens.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what got you interested in that?
Yeah, so when I took the gap year, I was working basically on software investments for the most part. And part of my job is just staying up with like what is the latest technology that's emerging, what is trending, is it investable, is it not? And one of the big things that was creating a lot of coverage were NFTs. And yeah, I guess that's essentially what got me interested. And I was like, what is an NFT? And I thought it was just really amazing how I got to make kind of like my interest in like tech with my interest in art. So I feel like that's one of the reasons why I created so much hype, because like we haven't really had anything like that before, really.
That applied to artists.
Yeah, applied to artists. Yeah.
Nice. So what is an NFT?
Yeah. So like you said, NFT stands for non-fungible token. So what that essentially means is that you could have a digital asset such as a JPEG, a video. Think of anything that's digital and native to the internet. You could basically mint that on a blockchain, which essentially means that you could basically put it on this public ledger that verifies that the NFT is yours. So
it's like a contract.
Yeah, it's a contract. So I guess like the way to think about it is, so if you think about the internet, who owns the internet, right? It's a lot of people throughout the world. Sometimes even governments that are very legislatively involved with the internet. Think of maybe for example China that has a pretty much like owns like the infrastructure and owns basically what people could see or not. So the thing about NFTs is that it's native to the internet. So you don't need any government, you don't need any individuals. It's all decentralized. So it's native to the internet, and you could basically ensure that your assets are there and verifiable. That's essentially what an NFT does. Yeah.
It's so I struggle with NFTs from an art perspective because, you know, when I think of something like a JPEG, right? You know, JPEGs are highly reproducible, right? And thinking about like Walter Benjamin, you know, art and history of art and mechanical reproduction, right? So one of the things that I wonder about is I really like the part that you were saying about it not needing a government entity, that it's native to the internet. But it also claims ownership, right? Which is this kind of capitalistic idea that like you can own this digital image, this thing that doesn't exist in real life. So I'm wondering, has your research brought you to any conclusion or ideas about like where authorship or where ownership lies within that thing, right? So like if I take an image as the photographer, I have copyright, you know, of that image. But if someone else mints and has an NFT of this JPEG file, you know, do they now have ownership of my image? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's honestly been a very hot topic within the NFT community. So right now we're very, very early on, and there's a lot of work of arts, like for example Banksy's, that's just been basically taken from them and just minted on these platforms, and that honestly just like also just lowers the value because it's not necessarily the authentic one.
Right.
But then again, it's just kind of like, what is authentic? Like, what does it mean to own something?
Right.
So yeah, that's a problem that's going on right now. You could also technically mint the same JPEG on two different blockchains that you could. Right now, the most popular one is Ethereum, but then there's another one that's called Cardano that's also growing, and you could essentially mint both of them and claim ownership to both. But like originally, that's not what it's intended to be. That's just kind of like a edge case, really, that's happening.
And like you said, like it really can just be any piece of data, right? Like people have minted tweets, they've minted
Yeah.
JPEGs of Michael Jordan or MPEGs of Michael Jordan, whatever. And part of it is sort of this like scarcity thing, and part of it is a way to, but it's also sort of
artificial scarcity.
Scarcity, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that like that JPEG is everywhere, but now it's unique. There's I don't know if you've looked into. There's a lot of talk too about, particularly like with Ethereum and some of these blockchains, that there's a resource issue, right? Like the way that in the same way that Bitcoin is produced, it requires a lot of computer resources. Have you done any looking into that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like it's definitely a problem. So there's a few mechanisms which cryptocurrencies and Ethereum's basically work under, and the first blockchain, I guess, like verification system is proof of work. So that's what Ethereum and Bitcoin and a lot of these big cryptocurrencies use. And this is kind of like just like the first, I guess, breakthrough in decentralization, like the first way that people actually solve the problem of how do you have something that's completely decentralized on the internet. So proof of work tends to basically be extremely resource heavy. But proof of stake, this is the second iteration of it. It's going to be much more efficient.
What is can you just briefly describe, do you know what is proof of work?
Yeah, so proof of work essentially means that you're basically verifying transactions through literally work. So
computer work.
Yeah, computer work. So yeah, at a high level, essentially what happens is that there's this thing called blocks, and blocks are basically the ledgers with information. And to basically mine a block, you have to solve extremely complex cryptographic problems, and a lot of that uses a lot of energy consumption from like computer hard drives. Like people are buying really decked out like motherboards and GPUs to basically to basically compute these really long computations, and then crack the problem, solve the problem, and then they get rewarded through Bitcoin. That's what's called mining. That's the process of actually verifying transactions. So that's extremely
energy.
Resource. It uses a lot of resources essentially. Proof of stake is a different mechanism where it's instead of purposely having to solve all these big blocks and have to go through all these big blocks of information, solve all these really hard problems. It's essentially just a more efficient way where you have the ledger at the beginning, so that you don't have to basically mine blocks afterwards. It's like, I don't know, it's like I'm watering things down significantly, but it's just more efficient.
Kind of an overview.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot of these concerns with energy are really going to start going away once people figure out how to use different mechanisms to verify transitions on the blockchain. But yeah, it is a big problem. But on the bright side, it has caused energy, like renewable energy, to become incentivized to basically become cheaper. So right now, anywhere between, and this is according to like a New York Times article online, that basically they said that anywhere between like 39 to around 60-70%, don't quote me on that, but basically a large percentage of all the current consumption that goes through blockchain is actually through renewables. So yeah, it is using a lot of energy, but it's also using renewable energy that would have gone to waste anyway. Like there's honestly a lot of problems with like solar energy that doesn't get used or
Right, like midday.
Yeah, midday.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're not
Yeah.
running the air conditioner, then
Yeah.
Right.
it just burns off.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, that's kind of like how the problem has been sustainable, at least now. Because I mean, it's insane how much energy it uses.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I feel like you've given us a peek into the future of what NFTs and blockchain and this entire new structure might have for energy.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering, with your research and your interest, what are some of the outcomes that you might envision, fantasize about 5, 10 years down the road? What is a world that has let's assume, embraced this NFT world?
Mhm.
What are we looking at?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start off by saying kind of like what the misconceptions of NFTs are. So my girlfriend goes to RISD and she does illustration, so she's very opinionated about this.
Yeah.
And I guess like in the against like NFTs like bandwagon.
Yeah, I get that.
So so yeah, most people tend to misconfuse NFTs for like actual art. NFTs are not art. Like oftentimes people will see like a JPEG of like a bored ape, like for example, and say, oh, that's like not art. And that's not necessarily it with NFTs. Like you should be thinking about NFTs as kind of like the underlying tool that allows you to sell things online. So yeah, I mean, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, that NFT is an art." Well, I mean, it's not the NFT that is the art. It's more of like the JPEG that it's supporting on the platform that people aren't calling art. And depending who you ask, that's very valid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I guess like when you think of it as an underlying technology, there are a lot of use cases for this. The first one I'll talk about is ticketing. So if you ever buy, I guess like sports tickets, like you'll have a QR code that's unique for you, and that's great. But like let's say if you want to resell that ticket, there's not necessarily a way to verify that that ticket is real. So right now there's actually a lot of people trying to create a solution for this with NFT ticketing, where it's basically you could instead of having like QR codes that you could use to sign in, it'll be a QR code on a blockchain, so that it verifies completely that it is yours. And then that way, if you want to resell a ticket, you don't have to worry about it being a counterfeit, really.
Interesting. Never considered that before.
Yeah. So that's like an actual use case that is very realistic on its own. In the art world, that's a huge question again. It's very divided, honestly. Like artists like Kenny Schaefer, he embraces NFTs, and he's like a huge digital artist that's very well known, and he was very happy to come across NFTs because for the first time he had like a very concrete way of of monetizing his work. So he had a very like I had a conversation with him last month, and one of the big I guess like eye-opening things was that he said that he had an art gallery in Berlin, and he said for the first time the art gallery was waiting to get paid by him, and that's something that never happens. The artists always wait to get paid by the art gallery. And there's all these like I guess like transparency issues with like pricing, with like how you sell things. Like if you're an artist selling things in an art gallery, you're not really even choosing what your art gets priced at, really.
It's true.
Like you're not really meeting you might not even meet the owner, like the purchaser of the art. There's a lot of I guess like not the things that are just very not clear.
Because the gallery is sort of the middleman.
The gallery is the middleman. So NFTs in this example, because it's decentralized, its own system, it basically gets to cut out the middleman. So there's a lot of systems that have these middlemen to basically verify all the things that are going on in the back end, the things that you don't see, that could be taken away, such as the ticketing, such as I guess like artists posting their art on galleries, and things like that. Like another cool thing is with NFTs you could write in royalties into the contract. So again, like this is a huge problem that artists currently have. Like if you're an artist and you sell a piece of work and then it goes on to appreciate in value and it gets resold at a much higher price, you're most likely not gonna get a cut of that. And NFTs, that's different.
You can build that into
the smart contract. Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow. Does it have? I mean, this is neither of our art experience, but I know like historically paintings and things would have a provenance, right? Like a history of the tracking. I assume you can do some of that too.
Yeah. You get to see all that on like the public ledger. So you could see where things go from owner to owner. Yeah, and very striking, clear similarities to like the real art market. Like, there's already been cases of like stolen and hacked like NFTs from like some artists that got taken away from like their wallet and then get resold into kind of like a black market online. And just like the real black market with like real stolen physical
Goods.
goods, it's the value depreciates at like the similar rate as like the NFTs that were stolen.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I suppose the big
Wow.
thing with art heists, right? Like they,
Yeah.
if you steal a Da Vinci, right? Like there's not a big market. People know it's
No,
stolen.
yeah,
So
exactly.
it's you don't get as much money as you might think. Um, well, sort of relating this back, you kind of saw the NFT as a tool, just as like social media might be a tool. Do you have like advice for artists or creators who are interested? Like, how do you start? Like, clearly, it's sort of a complex issue. How do you kind of
Yeah.
navigate it?
yeah.
And let me just add, maybe piggyback onto that question. Just a simple: are
Should
you
you?
for or against?
Yeah.
You know, in your opinion, I know it's very, very big, and maybe let's just keep the scope down to like NFTs and creative stuff, because the ticketing thing, I could see a real use case for that. That makes a lot of sense. But in terms of creative work and NFTs, are you for or are you against?
Yeah, I'm absolutely for NFTs.
Mm.
But I am more realistic in the sense of like what it can be. So there's so many different pain points that need to be addressed with the usage of NFTs before it could gain that like widespread adoption. But it's definitely not like the end all be all that a lot of people are just hyping this up to be. And we're still, again, very early on into this journey of NFTs. And I don't know if it will actually, nobody knows if this thing will actually end up sticking. And if it'll become the new norm. Like, there's a lot of gatekeepers in the art industry that don't want this to basically take off for a lot of reasons. Like,
It's a whole industry.
You'll be
yeah.
shocked by the amount of misinformation that's being, I guess, shared in a lot of these a lot of like pro art prints. Like, I remember there was like one article that I read that called and like what's his name? I'm blanking on his name. Basically, he was a founder of Mark Andreessen. There we go. I was like, okay, like I know it's Andreessen Horowitz, but is it Ben Horowitz or Mark Andreessen? Mark Andreessen, yeah, like they called Mark Andreessen anti NFT. And he's arguably been one of like the biggest forces pushing NFTs actually. So yeah, they're basically pushing this information that like he, for example, doesn't really believe in NFTs because he has a massive private gallery, and they're like, yeah, he has a massive private gallery of like physical art. Like, why would he ever want like a JPEG? And they didn't know that he's probably one of the biggest proponents of NFTs, and he's been using his like venture capital firm A16 to really push the success of NFTs, and they've been investing a lot into it.
Wow.
So yeah, just simple things like that are getting pushed a lot. So I don't know how long it'll be before some of that just starts, I guess, like falling apart. But who knows?
Wow.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different tools right now. Like you said, there's like different blockchains that you can. So it's kind of the Wild West in terms of what options you have, right? And like things are changing every day. So it's maybe not like social media is as unstable as that is. It's a lot more stable in terms of as a tool for artists, right?
Yeah. And one thing you said earlier about kind of like NFTs being like very capitalistic in the sense that it drives like ownership, right? I don't know, like I've been thinking about this a lot, and I feel like if anything, NFTs, and this is not, I don't know, like I'm speaking at the top of my head, but they could be they more align with, I guess, communist values. Because if you think about it, what it really is doing is that it's bringing back like ownership of like the means of production back to the people. So if you think about, have you heard of a DAO, like a decentralized autonomous organization?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, these are basically native organizations on the internet, and they vote through blockchain tokenisms. But again, like it's very decentralized. There's not like a single like C-suite executive board that makes all these decisions. It's very decentralized, and basically how much voting power you have is how many tokens you're owning in a lot of these organizations. And it changes from organization. Like, some organizations are like, you only need one token and everybody gets one vote despite how many tokens they own. But like, for the most part, it's basically like you have a direct ownership in a lot of these things, and it basically brings back like the means of production back to like the people that are in it. So it's a lot more, I guess, like equitable in a lot of senses. And this is what it's doing with NFTs, for example. The NFTs is like the artist has direct ownership of like the production. So if it gets resold, they get a cut of like the royalties essentially.
I guess I hadn't thought of it like that, because a lot of the examples that I have seen have been about people minting works that weren't theirs.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
so, but I could kind of see, now that you describe it that way, in a utopia where people aren't like stealing other people's work, which happens all the time, how that could fit within that kind of like more communist or socialist paradigm of production. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I really had never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's sort of changing, maybe not that there are gatekeepers, but who the gatekeepers are, right? Like maybe
Right.
there's one set of traditional gatekeepers in the art world that, you know, the gallery owners, the collectors, the auction houses, and this might, and although they're all involved in this now too, but and this might be a different mechanism for that. But where that will go is kind of open, right? Still, maybe
Yeah.
it's more ecumenical, maybe, or more.
Well, I guess it also depends on, because I see what you mean about the means of production, but there's also the question of like, what is the perceived value of something? Like, there's someone making like 2D illustrations of gorilla heads for like millions of dollars and selling them for millions of dollars. And so, like, you know, I think they're like 16 or something, which is great. Not knocking on a 16-year-old making money, especially through some form of creative means. But there's still like, there's still that question of like, who actually then gets to access or own or participate in this economy, whether it's capitalist or not.
Right.
Is an interesting question. Really fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Caín.
Thank you.
It's been a
Thanks very
great
much.
conversation. Sweet.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything else?
I feel like that we covered a good portion of that.
Cool.
Great.
Awesome. So if you're interested in reading some of Caín's research, we will be sure to document or link to his article on medium.com in this video. And Caín, where can people find you?
Yeah, people find me on Twitter at Caín_Yepez. And that's probably the best way to reach me.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Really appreciate
And we're hoping to do more of these. We have a few more later this week with other CTAs and their projects on using Figma, on Krita, an animation software, and as well as more. So
Yep.
we'll be doing more. Thanks.
MML out.